The gunshot echoed across the valley like a crack of thunder, sending Isabella Rose scrambling for cover as her horse reared in panic. The searing pain in her side told her everything she needed to know. She'd been hit, and she was in serious trouble. Wyoming Territory, 1876. Isabella hadn't planned on dying in this god-forsaken wilderness, but as the blood seeped through her fingers and the world tilted sideways, she wondered if she'd have any say in the matter. Her horse had bolted, dust still hanging in the air where it had disappeared over the ridge. The coach she'd been trailing was long gone, along with any hope of assistance from that quarter. "Damn you, Harold," she whispered through gritted teeth, pressing harder against the wound. Her brother-in-law had a lot to answer for, starting with stealing her late sister's inheritance and ending with hiring guns to ensure Isabella didn't make it to Cheyenne to contest the will. The sun beat down mercilessly as she dragged herself toward a stand of cottonwoods near the creek bed. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain radiating from the bullet wound. Isabella had always prided herself on her independence, leaving Boston to become a school teacher. In Denver had scandalized her family, but now she found herself praying someone, anyone, would happen along this remote stretch of trail. As consciousness began to slip away, the thunder of hoofbeats reached her ears. Isabella tried to call out, but her voice emerged as little more than a whisper. The darkness at the edges of her vision closed in, and the last thing she saw was a tall figure dismounting a chestnut stallion and running toward her. Isaac Walker had been tracking the wounded buck for nearly 3 hours when he heard the gunshot. It wasn't hunting season, and the report didn't sound like his Winchester. Abandoning the deer trail, he rode Samson hard toward the sound, one hand resting on the Colt at his hip. He'd spent enough years on the frontier to know trouble when he heard it. 4 years fighting in the war. Between the states and 7 more ranging across the territories had taught him to expect the worst and hope for the best. What he hadn't expected was to find a woman bleeding out by Cottonwood Creek. Madam, can you hear me?" Isaac knelt beside her, his weathered hands already checking for a pulse. She was alive, but barely. The bullet had caught her in the side, and while it didn't appear to have hit anything vital, the blood loss was substantial. With practiced efficiency, Isaac tore strips from his spare bandana and pressed them against the wound. The woman was striking. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins, and even unconscious, there was a determined set to her jaw that spoke of grit. Her clothes were quality, not the homespun most settlers wore. A city woman, then. What was she doing out here alone? Questions would have to wait. Night was approaching, and they were a good 15 miles from his cabin. Moving her was risky, but leaving her exposed would be a death sentence. "I'm going to help you, madam," he said, knowing she couldn't hear him. "But it's not going to be a comfortable ride." With gentle hands that belied their strength and roughness, Isaac lifted her onto Samson. He mounted behind her, keeping her secure against his chest with one arm, while he guided the horse with the other. Every jolt made him wince, imagining her pain even in unconsciousness. His cabin wasn't much, but it had what he needed to treat a gunshot wound. The sun was setting by the time the small log structure came into view. Isaac had built it himself after growing weary of drifting. The land wasn't his, legally it belonged to the railroad, but in these parts, possession counted for more than paper deeds. He carried her inside, laying her carefully on his bed. By lamplight, he examined the wound more thoroughly. The bullet had torn through her side, but hadn't lodged inside her small mercies. Still, the injury was serious, and infection was the real enemy now. Isaac heated water on the cook stove, prepared clean cloths, and gathered the meager medical supplies he kept on hand, whiskey for disinfectant, needle and thread, and a jar of honey and herbs that an old Shoshone woman had given him for treating wounds. He'd used it on himself more than once, and still had all his limbs to show for it. With deft fingers, he cut away the blood-soaked fabric around the wound. The woman stirred, moaning softly. "Easy now," he murmured. "I know it hurts something fierce, but I've got to clean this out." Her eyes fluttered open, briefly striking green eyes that locked with his for just a moment before rolling back as a pain overwhelmed her again. Through the long night, Isaac tended to her. He cleaned and stitched the wound, applied the healing salve, and wrapped it in the cleanest bandages he could manage. When fever set in, as he'd feared it would, he bathed her forehead with cool cloths from the creek. His rough hands moved with surprising gentleness as he wiped the sweat from her brow. "You're going to be fine," he told her, as she tossed restlessly in the grip of fever dreams. "Tough as old leather, I can tell. Just keep fighting." He talked to her through the night, his low voice a constant presence in the darkness. He told her about Samson, about the deer he'd been tracking, about the cabin he'd built with his own 2 hands. Words he rarely spoke to anyone flowed freely in the quiet of the night, as if something about her unconscious form invited confidences. "Never thought I'd have a lady in my bed," he said with a wry smile as dawn approached. "Least not one I hadn't been properly introduced to. Isaac Walker, madam, at your service. I'd tip my hat if I were wearing one." The fever broke just after sunrise. Isaac had dozed off in the chair beside the bed, his hand still holding a damp cloth against her forehead. He woke instantly when she stirred. "Water," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. Isaac helped her take small sips from a tin cup. "Easy does it. Too much too fast will make you sick." Her eyes, clearer now, studied his face. "You saved my life." "Don't know about that," he said, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her gaze. "Just did what anyone would've." "No," she said with surprising firmness. "Not anyone. Thank you, mister." "Walker, Isaac Walker, Isabella Rose." She tried to sit up and immediately grimaced in pain. "Whoa there, Miss Rose. That bullet took a fair piece of you with it. You'll be staying put for a while." Her eyes widened. "How long have I been here?" "Just the night. Found you yesterday afternoon." "I need to get to Cheyenne," she said, alarm creeping into her voice. "Immediately." Isaac shook his head. "Not immediately, not even soon. That wound needs time to heal before you go bouncing around on horseback." Isabella closed her eyes, frustration evident on her pale face. "You don't understand. There's a deadline. My sister's will. I have to contest it before the end of the month." "That's still 3 weeks away," Isaac said, having kept rough track of the date by marking notches on a post. "Plenty of time for you to heal enough to travel." "But Harold's men," she began, then stopped herself. Isaac's expression hardened. "The men who shot you, I take it?" She nodded weakly. "My brother-in-law. He's stolen everything that should have gone to my niece. I'm the only one who can stop him, but he clearly doesn't intend to let me reach Cheyenne." "Well," Isaac said, pouring her more water, "he's going to be mighty disappointed when you walk into that courthouse." Isabella studied him, surprise evident in her expression. "You believe me? Just like that?" Isaac's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Miss Rose, in my experience, people don't get themselves shot over lies. Besides, I've known enough men like your brother-in-law. Power and money make some men forget they have souls." "Then you'll help me get to Cheyenne?" "When you're well enough," he agreed. "Not before. I didn't spend all night keeping you alive just to watch you kill yourself, trying to ride too soon." Isabella wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her. Her eyelids grew heavy, and Isaac saw the moment she surrendered to it. "Rest," he said softly. "Your fight will wait for you." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Isaac would check and clean Isabella's wound in the morning, then prepare a simple breakfast. He hunted and tended his small garden plot, never straying too far from the cabin. In the evenings, they talked. Isabella told him about growing up in Boston, about her sister Emily's marriage to Harold Wells, a man who had seemed charming until he had what he wanted. She spoke of Emily's death in childbirth and Harold's subsequent neglect of his daughter, little Margaret. "He's not fit to raise her," Isabella said on the third night, able to sit up now against the pillows. "Emily's will left everything to Margaret, with me as guardian, but Harold produced another will, dated later, leaving him everything. It's a forgery. I'd stake my life on it." "You very nearly have," Isaac observed. She smiled ruefully. "Yes, well, perhaps not my finest decision to travel alone, but I couldn't risk bringing anyone else into danger. So you risked yourself instead. Margaret is worth it. She's only 6, and she's already lost so much." Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Family's worth fighting for." "Do you have family, Mr. Walker?" A shadow crossed his face. "Had. Parents passed before the war. Brother died at Antietam." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Long time ago now." But Isabella could see it wasn't, not really. The war had ended 11 years ago, but some wounds never fully healed. She recognized the look she'd seen it in many men's eyes in Boston after they returned. "Which side?" she asked quietly. "Union. Joined up in '62 after my brother fell. Fought till the surrender." Isabella nodded. "My father insisted it was an unnecessary war. That business interest would have eventually resolved the issue of slavery." Isaac's eyes hardened. "With respect, Miss Rose, your father was wrong. Some things are worth fighting for, even at terrible cost." "I agree," she said, surprising him. "That's why I became a teacher. Education is how we prevent such divisions in the future." Isaac studied her with new interest. "You're a teacher?" "In Denver, or I was until Emily died. I've taken leave to sort out this situation with Margaret." Their conversations ranged widely over the following days. Isaac told her about his years after the war, working cattle drives in Texas, prospecting in Colorado, scouting for the Army. He'd seen more of the country than most men, but never found a place that felt like home until this small patch of Wyoming wilderness. "It's beautiful here," Isabella admitted on the 7th day, when Isaac helped her outside to sit on the porch. The cabin sat in a small clearing, with mountains rising in the distance and the creek burbling nearby. Wildflowers dotted the meadow, and the air smelled of pine and sage. "It suits me," Isaac said simply. "Most folks want more company than the trees and wildlife provide." "Don't you get lonely?" He shrugged, leaning against the porch railing. "Used to people coming and going in my life. Trees stay put." Isabella watched him, noting the ease with which he moved through his world. There was something compelling about his self-sufficiency, his quiet confidence. Boston men postured and preened. Isaac simply was. By the 10th day, Isabella was moving around the cabin without assistance, though the wound still pulled painfully if she moved too quickly. Isaac had washed her blood-stained clothes and repaired them as best he could. They hung loosely on her frame. Now she'd lost weight during her recovery, but she was grateful to be back in her own garments. "We should leave in 3 days," she announced over breakfast. "That will give us ample time to reach Cheyenne before the deadline." Isaac frowned. "The wound's healing well, but riding's going to tear at those stitches." "I'm stronger than I look," Isabella insisted, "and this can't wait. 2 days more won't make a difference. It might if Harold's men are still looking for me. We need time to avoid them, take a less direct route if necessary." Isaac couldn't argue with that logic. 3 days then. But we go slow, and you tell me if the pain gets too bad." Isabella nodded, though they both knew she'd endure any amount of pain to reach Cheyenne on time. That evening, as Isaac chopped wood outside, Isabella took stock of the cabin that had been her sanctuary. It was simple one main room, with the bed in one corner, a table and chairs, the cook stove, and shelves holding Isaac's few possessions. A small lean-to at the back held tools and supplies. What caught her attention were the books. A small shelf near the bed held perhaps a dozen volumes, well-worn and clearly cherished. She ran her fingers along their spines. Shakespeare, Thoreau, Whitman, a volume of Greek mythology, several history texts. "Didn't figure you for a reading man," she said when Isaac returned with an armload of wood. He looked almost embarrassed. "Books are good company on winter nights." "They're wonderful choices. I use these same texts with my older students. Picked most of them up from a professor heading back east. Got tired of the frontier," he said. "Traded them for a week's worth of fresh game." "You got the better deal," Isabella said with a smile. "Thought so too." He arranged the wood near the stove. "Never had much schooling, but I like learning." Words have a way of sorting out your thoughts. Isabella felt a surge of respect for this man who had created his own education in the wilderness. "Would you read something? I've missed books during my recovery." Isaac hesitated, then selected Whitman's Leaves of Grass. As darkness fell outside, his deep voice filled the cabin with poetry, and Isabella closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. There was something intimate about sharing literature this way, something that connected them beyond their circumstances. When he finished reading, a comfortable silence settled between them. Isabella realized with a start that she'd missed these quiet evenings when they reached Cheyenne and their paths inevitably diverged. The thought troubled her more than it should have. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cool. Isaac had spent the previous day checking Samson's shoes, repairing Isabella's saddle that he'd retrieved from where she'd fallen, packing provisions for the journey. They would need to stop in settlements along the way, but he preferred to be prepared for any circumstance. "We'll head southeast," he explained as he helped her mount. "Longer route, but it keeps us away from the main trails where those men might be watching." Isabella nodded, adjusting herself carefully in the saddle. The wound pulled uncomfortably, but the pain was manageable. "How long will it take?" 5, maybe 6 days if we go slow." He swung up behind her, his arms reaching around to take the reins. "Tell me if you need to stop." The first day passed without incident. Isaac was careful to avoid jarring Isabella's injury, keeping Samson to an easy walk most of the time. They made camp early, in a sheltered spot near a small stream. Isaac efficiently set up a lean-to and built a small, nearly smokeless fire. "You've done this before," Isabella observed as he prepared a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and coffee. "Too many times to count." He handed her a tin plate. "Army scouts learn to travel light and leave no trace." "Were you a good scout? Good enough to still be breathing?" He sipped his coffee. "Learned a lot from the Shoshone and Crow. They know this land better than any white man ever will." "You respect them," she noted. It wasn't a common attitude among frontiersmen. "Man'd be a fool not to." His expression darkened. "Seen too much of what we've done to them not to understand their anger. Hard to blame a man for fighting when everything's being taken from him." Isabella studied him in the firelight. "You're not what I expected when I first saw you." "And what did you expect, Miss Rose?" There was amusement in his voice. "I'm not entirely sure. Not someone who reads Whitman and contemplates the injustices done to the native peoples. Don't know that I'm contemplating much, just seen enough to know right from wrong." Isabella smiled. "That's more contemplation than most men manage." As night deepened around them, they sat in comfortable silence. The stars emerged in breathtaking profusion, more than Isabella had ever seen in Boston or Denver. "It's magnificent," she whispered, gazing upward. "One of the reasons I stay out here," Isaac admitted. "Can't see the stars proper in cities." When it came time to sleep, Isaac insisted she take the lean-to while he slept in the open. "I prefer it anyway," he said when she protested. "Been sleeping under the stars most of my life." Isabella woke several times during the night, the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness startling her. Each time, she saw Isaac's form near the banked fire, sometimes awake and watchful, sometimes sleeping but clearly alert to any disturbance. His presence was reassuring in ways she couldn't fully articulate. They resumed their journey at dawn. Isaac seemed to know exactly where they were going, without any marked trail to follow. The terrain gradually changed from forest and meadow to more rugged country. "There's a small settlement about 8 miles ahead," Isaac told her as they stopped to rest at midday. "We can replenish supplies there." "Will it be safe?" He nodded. "Small enough that strangers are noticed, but not unusual. Your brother-in-law's men would stand out." The settlement turned out to be little more than a trading post with a few scattered cabins around it. The proprietor, a grizzled man named Jennings, greeted Isaac with a nod of recognition. "Walker, been a while." "Jennings, need some supplies and information." While Isaac purchased flour, coffee, and ammunition, he casually inquired about travelers on the main road to Cheyenne. "Had a group through yesterday," Jennings reported. 3 hard-looking types asking about a woman traveling alone. Didn't like the look of them, so I played dumb." Isabella tensed, and Isaac placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Anyone else of note?" "Stage came through this morning. Other than that, just the usual prospectors and settlers." They left with their supplies and valuable knowledge. Harold's men were still searching, and not far ahead. "We'll need to be more careful," Isaac said as they rode away. "Stay off the main trails completely." "We can't afford delays," Isabella reminded him. "And we can't afford you getting shot again." His tone brooked no argument. "We'll make the deadline, Miss Rose. I promise you that." The third day brought rain, a steady soaking downpour that slowed their progress considerably. Isabella's wound ached in the damp, though she tried to hide her discomfort. By mid-afternoon, she was shivering despite her rain slicker. "We need to stop," Isaac said, eyeing her with concern. "There's an old line shack about a mile east that trappers use. We can dry out there. The shack was crude but sound, with a small wood stove that Isaac soon had burning hot. He helped Isabella out of her wet clothes with a clinical detachment that nevertheless made her cheeks flush. Wrapped in a blanket, she sat near the stove while Isaac hung their garments to dry. "Let me check that wound," he said, kneeling beside her. His fingers were gentle as he examined the healing injury. "No signs of infection, but you're pushing too hard. You need rest. We don't have time for—" "We'll make time," he interrupted firmly. "One day of rest now is better than you collapsing before we reach Cheyenne." Isabella wanted to argue, but found she lacked the energy. The past days of riding had taken more of a toll than she'd admitted, even to herself. "Just until morning," she conceded. Isaac smiled. "We'll see how you're feeling then." He prepared a more substantial meal than they had had on the trail beans with salt pork and fresh biscuits baked in the small stove. The hot food revived Isabella's spirits, and as the rain drummed on the roof, they fell into easy conversation. "Tell me about your niece," Isaac said. "What's she like?" Isabella's face softened. "Margaret is remarkable, serious and thoughtful, like her mother was, but with flashes of mischief. She loves stories and animals. She has Emily's dark hair and my father's blue eyes." She paused, her expression clouding. "She must be so frightened now, with Harold." "Children are resilient," Isaac said, "but they shouldn't have to be." "No, they shouldn't." Isabella studied him curiously. "Have you ever thought of having a family of your own?" Isaac looked away. "Once. Long time ago." "What happened?" He was silent for so long that Isabella thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Her name was Catherine. We were to be married after I returned from the war." "She didn't wait?" Isabella guessed gently. "She waited. I came back changed. Couldn't settle, couldn't sleep through the night without the nightmares. Kept moving from place to place." He shrugged. "Eventually she married a shopkeeper. Good man, stable. I'm sorry. Don't be. She deserved better than what I could give her then. And now?" The question slipped out before Isabella could stop it. Isaac looked at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Now I know what I want. Just took me too long to figure it out." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Isabella became acutely aware of how close they sat, of the intimacy of the small shack with rain isolating them from the rest of the world. Isaac cleared his throat and stood. "You should rest. I'll keep watch." "Isaac," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded once, his eyes holding hers for a moment that stretched into something meaningful before he turned away. Isabella lay awake long after she should have been sleeping, listening to the rain and thinking about the quiet cowboy who had saved her life and was now risking his own to help her reach Cheyenne. Morning brought clearing skies and renewed determination. Isabella felt stronger after a full night's rest, and they set off at a good pace. The landscape was changing again, the mountains receding behind them as they entered rolling prairie. "Another 2 days should see us there," Isaac said as they paused at midday, assuming no further delays. But delays were precisely what they encountered late that afternoon. As they crested a small rise, Isaac suddenly reined in Samson, his body tensing. "What is it?" Isabella whispered, following his gaze to the valley below. "Riders. 3 of them, making camp by the creek." She strained to see. "Harold's men?" "Can't tell from here, but we'd best assume so." He backed Samson carefully down the slope until they were out of sight. "We'll have to go around. Adds half a day at least." Isabella bit her lip. "We're cutting it close already." "Better late than dead," Isaac said grimly. "If those are the same men who shot you, they won't hesitate to finish the job." They altered their course, heading further east before turning south again. The detour took them through rougher country, slowing their progress considerably. By nightfall, Isaac estimated they had lost nearly a full day. "We'll make it up tomorrow," he promised as they made camp in a sheltered gully. "Harder riding, but it can't be helped now." Isabella nodded, too tired to argue. The long days in the saddle were taking their toll, the wound in her side a constant reminder of what was at stake. As Isaac prepared their simple meal, she found herself watching him, the efficiency of his movements, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. In just 2 weeks, he had become someone she trusted completely, someone whose presence made her feel secure in a way she'd never experienced before. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. Their time together had a definite endpoint. Once they reached Cheyenne, once she had secured Margaret's inheritance and guardianship, their paths would diverge. Isaac would return to his solitary cabin, and she would take Margaret back to Denver. The thought left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. "You're quiet tonight," Isaac observed as he handed her a plate. "Just thinking about what happens after we reach Cheyenne." He nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "You'll win your case. Get your niece back." "Yes, but—" she hesitated. "What will you do?" Isaac poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the darkening sky. "Head back, I suppose. Got a cabin that needs tending." "Alone?" He looked up at that, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "Been that way a long time now." "Does it have to stay that way?" Isabella's heart was racing, but she held his gaze steadily. For a moment, Isaac seemed at a loss for words. Then his expression softened. "Guess that depends on a lot of things." "Such as?" "Such as whether a city-bred teacher could be happy in a one-room cabin miles from anywhere. Whether she'd grow to resent the man who took her away from civilization." Isabella set her plate aside and moved to sit beside him. "Or whether a solitary cowboy could adjust to having a woman and a child in his life. Whether he'd grow to resent the complications they brought." Isaac's hand found hers in the growing darkness. "Some complications are worth having." "Yes," she whispered. "I believe they are." He leaned closer, and for a breathless moment, Isabella thought he might kiss her. Instead, he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his rough fingers gentle against her skin. "We should get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be a hard ride." Isabella nodded, disappointed yet understanding the wisdom of his restraint. Their situation was precarious enough without adding emotional complications. But as she lay beneath her blanket that night, she knew it was already too late for such caution. Somewhere between the moment he'd found her bleeding by the creek and now, Isabella had fallen in love with Isaac Walker. The 5th day of their journey dawned clear and hot. They started early, pushing harder than they had previously. Isaac kept them moving at a steady pace, stopping only briefly to rest Samson and to check Isabella's wound, which was healing well, despite the rigors of travel. "How much farther?" Isabella asked during one such stop. "We'll reach the outskirts of Cheyenne by nightfall if we keep this pace," Isaac replied, tightening Samson's girth. "The courthouse tomorrow morning." Just in time. The deadline was the following day. They rode in companionable silence for most of the afternoon, each lost in thought about what awaited them in Cheyenne and what would come after. The prairie stretched around them, vast and golden in the late summer sun, punctuated occasionally by the silhouette of a distant rider or the smoke from a homestead's chimney. It was during one such moment of quiet reflection that disaster struck. The first shot kicked up dirt just ahead of Samson's hooves. The second whizzed past Isabella's ear, close enough that she felt the displacement of air. Isaac reacted instantly, wheeling the horse around and spurring him toward a nearby stand of cottonwoods. "Keep your head down!" he shouted, hunching protectively over Isabella as more shots rang out behind them. They reached the trees, and Isaac practically threw her from the saddle. "Stay low! Behind that trunk!" Isabella scrambled for cover as Isaac drew his Winchester from its scabbard. He fired 3 rapid shots in the direction of their pursuers. "How many?" she gasped. "2 that I can see, probably the same ones who shot you before." His face was grim as he reloaded. They must have been watching the approaches to Cheyenne. A bullet splintered bark near Isabella's head, and she ducked lower. "What do we do?" "Wait them out for now. They'll have to come closer if they want a clean shot, and that works to our advantage." Isaac fired again, then quickly changed position. "I count 2 rifles. If there's a third man, he's staying back." Time stretched interminably as the gunfight continued. Isaac moved constantly, firing from different positions to make it difficult for their attackers to pinpoint him. Isabella, weaponless, could only watch and pray. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when one of the attackers made a fatal error, moving too far from cover in an attempt to flank them. Isaac's shot found its mark, and the man went down with a cry. "Got one," Isaac said grimly. He was bleeding from a graze on his arm, but otherwise unharmed. The remaining shooter intensified his fire, bullets thudding into trees and ground around them. Then, abruptly, the shooting stopped. "He's running," Isaac said, peering cautiously around the tree trunk, heading back toward his horse. "We should go now, while we have the chance," Isabella urged. Isaac shook his head. "Could be a trap. We'll give it a few minutes to be sure." Those minutes felt like hours to Isabella, but eventually Isaac was satisfied that the danger had passed for now. "He'll come back with reinforcements," he predicted as they mounted Samson again. "We need to reach Cheyenne before that happens." They rode hard for the remaining daylight hours, pushing Samson to his limits. The lights of Cheyenne appeared in the distance just as darkness fell, a welcome sight after their harrowing afternoon. Rather than risk the main streets where they might be recognized, Isaac guided them to a small boarding house on the outskirts of town. The proprietress, a widow named Mrs. Landry, took one look at Isabella's exhausted face and Isaac's bloodied sleeve and ushered them inside without questions. "You need a doctor," Isabella insisted once they were alone in the small room Mrs. Landry had provided. "It's just a graze," Isaac dismissed, though he winced as she helped him remove his shirt to examine the wound. It was indeed superficial, but it needed cleaning. Isabella worked methodically, using the medical supplies Mrs. Landry had provided. Her fingers trembled slightly as they moved over Isaac's skin, aware of his closeness in the confined space. "Your own wound holding up?" he asked, his voice low. "Well enough. Though I think we've tested the limits of your stitching." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Never claimed to be a surgeon." When she had finished bandaging his arm, Isabella found herself reluctant to move away. Isaac seemed equally disinclined to restore the distance between them. "Isabella," he said softly, her name sounding different somehow in his voice. "Tomorrow, when this is done." A knock at the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Mrs. Landry had brought them a simple supper, and news that made Isabella's blood run cold. "There's talk in town about a man offering a reward for information about a woman newly arrived from Denver," the widow reported. "A family matter, he says, but people are saying he doesn't look like a man concerned about family." "Harold," Isabella whispered when they were alone again. "He must have come himself when his men failed." Isaac's expression darkened. "Changes things. He'll have the courthouse watched." "What do we do? The deadline is tomorrow." Isaac was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We go early, very early, before the courthouse officially opens. I know Judge Whitaker. He's a fair man, and he sometimes starts his day before dawn. If we can get to him before Harold's men are in position." "Will he listen without a formal hearing?" "He will when he hears that someone's trying to kill you to prevent your testimony." It was a slender hope, but the only one they had. They retired early, needing rest for what promised to be a challenging day ahead. Despite her exhaustion, Isabella found sleep elusive. She lay awake, listening to Isaac's steady breathing from the pallet he'd made on the floor, thinking about all that had happened since that fateful day by Cottonwood Creek. "Isaac," she whispered, "are you awake?" "Yes," came his immediate response. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "not of Harold, or even of failing. I'm afraid of what comes after." The floorboards creaked as Isaac sat up. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, she could just make out his silhouette. "What do you want to come after?" he asked quietly. Isabella took a deep breath. "I want Margaret to be safe. I want to continue teaching. And I want—" She hesitated. "I want you to be part of whatever comes next." Isaac moved to sit on the edge of her bed, his weight making the mattress dip. "I've been alone a long time, Isabella. Set in my ways. Not sure I'd make a good husband or father." "I think you would," she said, reaching for his hand in the darkness. "I've seen how you care for others, how you protect what matters to you." His fingers intertwined with hers. "A cabin in the wilderness is no place for a child used to city comforts. Children adapt, and cabins can be expanded." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not asking for promises, Isaac, just possibilities." In answer, he leaned down and kissed her a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as Isabella responded. His hand came up to cradle her face, rough calluses against her smooth skin. a contrast that somehow felt perfectly right. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "If we survive tomorrow," he said with a soft laugh, "we'll have plenty of time to explore those possibilities." Isabella smiled in the darkness. "Then we'd better make sure we survive." They left the boarding house well before dawn, Mrs. Landry providing them with coffee and biscuits for the road. The streets of Cheyenne were nearly deserted, with only the occasional worker heading to an early shift or reveler stumbling home from a late night. The courthouse was dark when they arrived, but a light burned in a side office. Isaac led Isabella to a back entrance, knocking softly. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a middle-aged man with spectacles and thinning hair. He frowned at the early visitors. "Walker? What in blazes are you doing here at this hour?" "Need your help, Judge. This is Miss Isabella Rose. She's here to contest a will, and there are men trying to kill her to prevent it." The judge's eyebrows rose dramatically, but he stepped aside to let them enter. "I assume there's more to this story." Inside his office, they explained everything: Emily's death, the forged will, Harold's attempts to eliminate Isabella. Judge Whitaker listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed a sharp legal mind. "Ordinarily, this would require a formal hearing," he said when they had finished. "But given the circumstances, I'm inclined to issue a temporary injunction, preventing Mr. Wells from disposing of any assets until a full investigation can be conducted." "That would be sufficient," Isabella said gratefully. "All I want is to protect Margaret's inheritance until she comes of age." "And your guardianship of the child?" "That's what matters most. Harold has no interest in raising her. He's only interested in controlling her money." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I'll need to take your formal statement, and then—" A commotion outside interrupted him. Raised voices, then the sound of running feet. "That'll be Harold's men," Isaac said grimly, moving to the window. "They must have spotted us entering." Judge Whitaker moved with surprising speed for his age, pulling open a drawer and removing a pistol. "This courthouse is under my protection, and I don't take kindly to threats against those seeking justice." He strode to the door, pistol in hand. "Mr. Walker, please escort Miss Rose to the sheriff's office. It's just across the square. Tell Sheriff Donovan that I sent you and explain the situation." "What about you, Judge?" Isabella asked anxiously. "I've been a judge in this territory for 15 years, young lady. I've faced down worse than some inheritance-stealing scoundrel." His expression softened slightly. "But I appreciate your concern. Now go, quickly." Isaac and Isabella slipped out through a side door just as the main entrance to the courthouse burst open. They hurried across the square, staying in the shadows of the buildings. The sheriff's office was dark, but a deputy was on duty. The young man looked skeptical of their story until Isaac mentioned Judge Whitaker's name. Then he immediately dispatched another deputy to the courthouse and sent a third to locate the sheriff. "Wait here," he instructed, indicating chairs by his desk. "Sheriff Donovan will want to hear this directly." Isabella sank into the offered chair, the events of the past 2 weeks catching up with her all at once. They were so close to success, yet still in danger until Harold was dealt with. Sheriff Donovan arrived within 30 minutes, a tall man with a salt and pepper mustache and an air of quiet authority. He listened to their story without interruption, then nodded once. "Judge Whitaker's already sent word," he confirmed. "We've got men looking for Harold Wells and the gunman who escaped yesterday. In the meantime, you two will stay here where it's safe." The next few hours passed in a blur of statements and paperwork. Judge Whitaker arrived to take Isabella's formal deposition regarding the will. By noon, he had issued the temporary injunction as promised. "Mr. Wells will be most disappointed when he receives this," the judge said with grim satisfaction, "assuming we can find him to serve it." They didn't have to wait long. Shortly after midday, a deputy burst into the office. "Sheriff, we've got Wells. Tried to board the eastbound train with a young girl. Station master thought something wasn't right. Girl was crying, saying she wanted her aunt." Isabella's heart leaped. "Margaret, is she all right?" "Seems fine, madam. Scared, but not hurt. They're bringing them both in now." The reunion with Margaret reduced Isabella to tears. The little girl flew into her arms with a cry of "Aunt Bella!" that made everything the gunshot wound, the arduous journey, the danger worthwhile. "I knew you'd come," Margaret said, her small arms tight around Isabella's neck. I told Uncle Harold you promised to take care of me, but he said you weren't coming back. I'll always come back for you, Isabella promised, smoothing the child's dark hair. Always. Harold Wells, meanwhile, found himself in considerably less pleasant circumstances. With Margaret safely reunited with Isabella and the injunction in place, Sheriff Donovan had no qualms about placing him under arrest for attempted kidnapping and conspiracy to commit murder. You can't prove any of this, Harold blustered as he was led to a cell. It's her word against mine. Actually, the sheriff said mildly, we caught your hired gun an hour ago. Man's got a lot to say about who paid him to shoot Miss Rose. By evening, the immediate crisis was resolved. Judge Whitaker had formally appointed Isabella as Margaret's guardian and trustee of her inheritance, pending a full hearing that would almost certainly confirm the arrangement. Harold remained in custody, facing serious charges that would likely send him to prison for many years. Sheriff Donovan provided Isabella and Margaret with rooms at the hotel, with a deputy posted outside for security. Isaac, having fulfilled his promise to get Isabella safely to Cheyenne, found himself at loose ends. Will you be heading back tomorrow? Isabella asked when they had a moment alone. Margaret had finally fallen asleep after the excitement of the day. Isaac looked uncertain for the first time since she'd known him. Thought I might stay on a few days, make sure everything's settled proper. Isabella smiled. I'd like that. And after? His voice was careful, measured. After, Margaret and I need to return to Denver. I have a teaching position waiting, and she needs stability after everything she's been through. Isaac nodded, his expression unreadable. Denver's a fine city. Growing fast. It is. Isabella took a deep breath. But I've been thinking, Denver has many qualified teachers. Wyoming Territory has few. Isaac's eyes sharpened with interest. That so? It is. And I understand the settlement near Cottonwood Creek has no school at all. None within 20 miles, Isaac confirmed, a hint of a smile beginning to form. A child needs education, Isabella continued, and a cabin can be expanded, as I said before, perhaps with a small schoolroom attached. Isaac stepped closer, taking her hands in his. Are you proposing a partnership, Miss Rose? I believe I am, Mr. Walker. She met his gaze steadily. A teaching partnership to start with. The rest, well, we have time to figure that out. A sensible approach? His smile broadened. Though I should warn you, I've already made up my mind about the rest. Have you? Isabella's heart was pounding. In answer, Isaac kissed her not the gentle, questioning kiss of the night before, but one filled with certainty and promise. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Isaac said, I believe I have some building to do when we get back, a schoolroom to start with, then perhaps a proper bedroom for a young lady, and eventually, he hesitated. Eventually, maybe more rooms for more young ones. Isabella smiled up at him, joy bubbling through her veins. I think that sounds like an excellent plan, Mr. Walker. 1 month later, the cabin by Cottonwood Creek bore little resemblance to the solitary dwelling Isaac had inhabited for years. An addition nearly doubled its size, with a separate room for Margaret and a small but functional schoolroom where Isabella had already begun teaching the children from nearby homesteads. The evenings found the three of them gathered around the expanded table, Margaret working on her letters while Isabella and Isaac discussed plans for the future. Sometimes they read aloud from Isaac's books, Margaret absorbing the poetry and stories with the same enthusiasm her aunt had at her age. On a crisp autumn evening, as Margaret slept and the first snowflakes of the season drifted past the windows, Isaac and Isabella sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill. I received a letter from Judge Whitaker today, Isabella said, leaning against Isaac's shoulder. Harold's trial is set for next month. The judge says conviction is all but certain. Isaac nodded, his arm tightening around her. Good. Margaret deserves to grow up without that shadow hanging over her. She's thriving here, Isabella observed. I worried she might find it too isolated after Denver. But she loves the space, the animals. She adores you. Feelings mutual, Isaac smiled. Never thought I'd enjoy having a curious 7-year-old following me around, asking questions about everything under the sun. Isabella laughed softly. She has a quick mind, like her teacher. Like both her teachers, Isaac corrected, dropping a kiss on top of Isabella's head. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow gradually transform the landscape into something magical and new. "I have something for you," Isaac said eventually, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small wooden box, carved with intricate patterns. "Made it myself. Not as fancy as what you might find in a city shop, but—" Isabella opened it to find a simple gold band. "Isaac," she breathed. "Thought it was time to make this partnership official," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "If you're ready?" "I've been ready since that night in the line shack," Isabella said, blinking back tears of happiness. "When you told me some complications are worth having." Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with a tenderness that still made her heart race after all these weeks. "Mrs. Landry and Cheyenne says the circuit preacher will be through next week," he murmured against her lips. "Thought we might ride into town, make it legal." "I'd like that," Isabella replied. "Margaret will be thrilled. She's already started calling you Uncle Isaac. You know." "Notice that." His expression grew serious. "I want to be more than that to her, if you're agreeable. Want to be a proper father to her. You already are, in all the ways that matter." Isabella squeezed his hand. "We're already a family, Isaac. The preacher will just make it official." As the snow continued to fall around them, Isabella reflected on the strange turns life could take. A month ago, she had been fighting for her life, uncertain of her future. Now she sat beside the man she loved, planning their wedding, with her niece sleeping peacefully inside the home they were building together. The journey from that creek bed where Isaac had found her, through the fever-racked night where he had wiped her brow with his rough hands and comforted her with soft words, to this moment of perfect contentment, it was a path she could never have imagined taking. Yet here she was, and she wouldn't change a single step that had led her here. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Isabella smiled, leaning up to kiss him softly. "I'm thinking that sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Isaac's answering smile told her he understood perfectly. "Welcome home, Isabella." And as the snow blanketed the wilderness around them, Isabella knew she had indeed found her home, not in a place, but in the hearts of the man beside her and the child sleeping inside, the family they had forged against all odds in the vast wilderness of the Wyoming Territory.